invite Aric Chen to come and talk to us about one of the most exciting new museums the Antipas that's being built in Hong Kong at the moment. Aric, come and join us.
Anyway, thank you, Catherine, for that very nice introduction, and to Catherine and the CFCCA for inviting me here. I would say I love the name of this event, the title of this event, Curating Contemporary China, because when I first read it, I wasn't sure whether it meant curating the contemporary China, meaning curating, sort of interpreting the sort of contemporary conditions in China, and how to curate that, or if it meant curating the contemporary in China, curating the contemporary more broadly in the context of China. And I like this sort of double entendre, so to speak, if you will, because it nicely captures sort of some of the questions that we had, some of the things we're trying to do at M+. Now, who is we? At M+, by we I mean M+, which is a new museum for visual culture, 20th century, 21st century visual culture, being built in Hong Kong. It's a very ambitious project. It's also a very young one. I was one of the earliest curators to be appointed, and that was only a year ago that I started. Now, when we talk about M+ in China, that title is meant to be a bit of a provocation. Just to give you some context, as I'm sure most of you know, China is undergoing this massive museum building boom right now, and for a few years now. There's this famous number of 400 museums having been built in China in the year 2011 alone. That came from a quote from a government official, and we're not clear how that was counted, but suffice to say, there are a lot of museums being built in China. Ning's, of course, being one of the very big ones. That's also an exception in the sense that it has a history going back to 1956. Most of these museums are brand new. And while there are many reasons for having a museum, for this growing interest in museums, the way it's framed in China, among Chinese, is that it is largely, or at least concretized by government fiat. The government has declared that cultural development is a national priority, and that has filtered down through the system. And so what you get is a lot of local officials who are scrambling to build museums, often with no money. Hence, these museums are often part of these land deals and real estate development projects. And the result of that, of course, is that often it's the building that comes first, and then it's figured out what kind of museum, if it's a museum, it will be. And then oftentimes, because of funding and other reasons, or lack thereof, the content is sort of an afterthought and sometimes lost by the wayside. So what we're trying to do is to work on a different model, which is to reverse that process where the content comes first, then the museum, then the building. How successful we are, how well it works out, only time will tell, but that's our intention, at least. So, I should say first that we are part of a larger project, a larger cultural district called the Cultural District in Hong Kong. Our site, which is the area in color, is this reclaimed land that did not exist 25 years ago. It's about 40 hectares. It's located on the Kowloon side. I don't know how well all of you know Hong Kong, but this is Tsim Sha Tsui, where Harbour City, the very famous shopping mall is, and the Peninsula Hotel is around here. And then here's Victoria Harbour going up to our side with Hong Kong Island down here in your basement somewhere. We will be located at where that red line is roughly where the high-speed rail terminus is being constructed now. That will be the terminus for the high-speed train that will connect Hong Kong to Guangzhou and the rest of China. We are on the water, as I said. Norman Foster, or Foster and Partners, his firm, has designed a master plan which includes a main sort of east-west axis, around which will be about 17 performing arts venues, outdoors, theaters, concert halls, big and small, as well as retail, dining, entertainment, a park at the end, and then right here is where M+ will. Now this is just an excerpt from the sort of mission statement of our museum advisory group, which sort of formulated the museum, came out with in 2006. M+ is more than a museum or building, so from the very beginning, it was very important to separate the idea of a building from a museum, with an emphasis on the museum as a site of sort of cultural and knowledge and other forms of production. It will be a new type of cultural institution focused on 20th and 20th century visual culture, broadly defined from the Hong Kong perspective, the perspective of now, and with a global vision. So we have a lot, we have a very broad mandate that is quite vague, but I'll try and describe it in greater detail. Now when we say visual culture, for us, that essentially means visual art, of course, design and architecture, which is the area that I'm focused on. Moving image, cinema, video, digital. And then within that and among that, we'll have an emphasis on youth art as well, and an undercurrent of popular culture, and the way popular culture has infiltrated, formed, responded to, reacted with these other disciplines that we're looking at. Now, of course, these categories are largely speaking Western constructs, and while they're still useful, and we respect those boundaries because of the sort of trajectories and histories that they all come from, we are also at the same time looking at sort of how we kind of play with those categories as well. While respecting the traditional categories, looking at other lenses through which we can see them, and also, importantly, the fluidity and overlap among the disciplines. And being a museum in Asia, this is especially relevant to us, given that historically, in our part of the world, there have not been such strong distinctions between disciplines and the arts, let's say. So again, we are a Hong Kong-based museum. We are publicly funded, though under a separate statutory body that gives us a little distance from the government per se. But rather than sort of looking inward, we are trying to sort of look out. So we'll, in terms of geographies, from our base in Hong Kong, we'll be looking, of course, at the Great Silver River Delta, the distribution that we're in. China, of course. Asia, to go even more broad, to go even broader, and beyond. What happened? I'm totally confused now. So it's important. We like to say, or at least I like to say that we're a museum for visual culture from an Asian perspective, not a museum of Asian visual culture. And I think that's a very important distinction. And this touches on a comment Catherine made about how many museums in China and throughout Asia are often sort of focused very much on national materials. We're hoping to create, or at least fill, a different sort of niche. And importantly, it's not just about geographies, but also the interactions, the connections, the links that we can draw in and among and between places, both within Asia and beyond. So we will have a building, and that's scheduled for to be completed, if all goes as scheduled, at the end of 2017. And of course, when we tell people that, especially in China, where museums can, you can sort of whip up a museum in 6 months or less sometimes. I'm not sure being they're all about this because some of the schedules that I hear about are so ambitious. People always sort of give me this sort of look of amusement, puzzlement, sympathy, and pity. Sort of like you have 4 or 5 years before you have a building. What are you doing? Well, I should. Here, I think I'm going to once again reinforce the idea that for us, a museum is not a building, and having spoken a little bit about why we believe this, I thought it might be useful to give a little sense of how we got to this point of being so emphatic about a museum not being a building, because this M+ and indeed the whole West Kowloon Cultural District are a product of a very long and in fact controversial process that has dragged on for about 15 years in Hong Kong, that went through quite a few stages that you see other places going through now in terms of their own kind of museum building plans. So the story starts in 1996, a year before the handover, and also a year before the Guggenheim Bilbao opened and sort of launched this Bilbao effect that people still talk about. In this year, the Hong Kong Tourism Board did a survey of visitors to Hong Kong, basically asking what they thought of Hong Kong, what they would like to see, and of course, Hong Kong has a reputation for not having a lot of cultural amenities, and whether fairly or not, and that definitely came out in this survey. At the same time, there was this big plot of empty land, which had been created with the construction of the Cross Harbour Tunnel, the Western Tunnel, as well as the Airport Express train tunnel, which runs underneath the sides. In fact, those 2 little buildings you see, the blue one and the yellow one, are ventilation and mechanical structures for those 2 tunnels. Eventually, 2 years later, just after the handover, the then Chief Executive of Hong Kong, Tong Xinhua, announced plans for the West Kowloon Cultural District to be on our current site. But at this point, it really was essentially, whether consciously or not, it was essentially still a real estate project. Because without sort of knowing what they meant by cultural district, the government launched a competition to master plan it. And in 2001, Norman Foster won that first competition to master plan the West Kowloon Cultural District with a scheme that includes this very dramatic canopy structure. Having developed the master plan or chosen the master plan, it was then decided that the government ought to put out a proposal to figure out what would actually be inside or on this site. And in 2003, there was an invitation for proposals for development of 3 Hong Kong consortiums led by real estate developers submitting 3 different proposals. And in fact, you can sort of see them here. This top one on your left actually included a proposal for branches of the Guggenheim and Pompidou. So it's sort of about kind of cobbling together these sort of cultural brands and institutions and managing this all under one roof as part of a broader commercial and retail and residential development. Now, this caused a lot of skepticism among the public, who started to feel as though this was not turning out to be a cultural district for them, for the city, but something more for the tourists, or even worse, the real estate tycoons in Hong Kong. And there was a huge public outcry, such that 2 years later, the whole thing was scratched, and the government decided to start over again. Now, I mentioned that there were plans to have a Pompidou and Guggenheim in one of the proposals in 2003. But after the sort of after that last sort of route kind of fell apart, Hong Kong did something which I think was very smart along my advice, which was they said, instead of just sort of giving a space to like becoming a branch of a museum somewhere else, why don't we create our own museum? And earlier this year, although a museum is not a building, we will have a building, and we announced the winning concept for our Plus building, which will be by Herzog and de Meuron. The Swiss firm, who of course is very well known here in the UK for designing the Tate Modern, and of course equally well known in China for their work with Ai Weiwei on the bird's nest. I won't go too much into the building because it's still being developed, but essentially Herzog and de Meuron's sort of stroke of genius was that I mentioned there is an Airport Express train tunnel right underneath the site, which causes all sorts of problems for our site, and yet what Herzog and de Meuron did was sort of perform this kind of jujitsu, where they sort of accepted that our site was on top of this train tunnel, which created difficult conditions, but they turned it into a positive. So what they propose and what we're doing is we will be excavating, digging out the tunnel actually, and using the silhouette of that structure, of that existing infrastructure, as a large bound space for large-scale installations that will anchor the building in its site. A site that many people took as being sort of featureless and ahistorical, which Herzog and de Meuron saw as having this really fascinating condition. We'll have about the building in total will be about 60,000 square meters, which is pretty big, with about 13,000 to 15,000 of that being gallery space. The galleries will be mostly concentrated on this one horizontal slab, and then a vertical tower rising above with offices, research center, dining, and other facilities. And you can't see here, but there are plans to embed LEDs across the entire facade to create a giant projection space for moving image digital and video works facing Victoria Harbour. Now, I think the lesson for this, or one of the takeaways we can sort of think about, is, you know, we're at a time now where, of course, culture is sort of equated with economic development, right? And that's one of the main justifications and one of the main impetuses for this sort of museum building, and especially in China. But what I think Hong Kong learned through its process, and I should say also that I'm new to Hong Kong, so I've only been there a year, but my take on it is what Hong Kong learned was that this culture equals economic development formula is really quite flawed. What is forgotten often is that, there's a sort of middle step that's often forgotten, which is that culture is actually equals content. Now, content may equal economic development, but it's really the content that matters, not the sort of abstract buzzword of culture. Without the content, you don't have the culture. And in fact, if you wanted to go back to the economic development justification argument, it's actually content that people consume, not this sort of label of culture. And so that's why, for us, it has been so important to always kind of place emphasis on this notion of content. Now, as I mentioned, we are a very young museum, and we are still sort of developing and refining defining our sort of collecting strategies and really figuring out who we are. Luckily, we have a bit of time, but we have started already. We've begun to build our collection. We will have a permanent collection, and we got a huge boost early this year with the donation of almost 1,500 works by Uli Sid, the Swiss collector who was the ambassador to China from Switzerland, but also had been working in China through his business since the 80s. And he really, arguably, over 30 years, assembled the most comprehensive collection of contemporary Chinese art, starting in the late 70s until now. And he gave us about 1,400 works. We purchased about 30, and that was a huge boost. Uli also founded the Chinese Contemporary Art Prize that Professor Zhang mentioned earlier. So he's been quite involved in China and in the art scene there for really a very long time. Since then, we've also, our collection right now is approaching 3,000, so we've sort of doubled that, and it's growing rapidly, including not just Chinese contemporary art, but of course art from other parts of Asia and the world, as well as design and architecture. For design and architecture, we're probably at about 500 to 700 works now. At the same time, we are pretending to be, or acting as though we are a fully functioning museum by mounting exhibitions in temporary locations throughout Hong Kong, leading up to the opening of our museum. There are many reasons for doing this. One is, of course, audience building. It's important for us to sort of share with the public what we're doing and engage to the point that when we're done open, we'll be ready, and hopefully they'll be ready too. It's also a way of allowing us to experiment sort of conceptually on the kinds of exhibitions we do, the sort of subjects and materials that we'll show, the way we think about them, the way we present them, and the way we execute them, even technically. So last year, May of 2012, we did our first roving exhibition, part of our what we call the Mobile N Plus series, and that was Mobile N Plus Yamate, with which we took over about 8 to 10 scattered sites, venues throughout the Yamate neighborhood of Hong Kong on the Kowloon side. And commissioned artists to show works and create installations for them. January of this year, we did in collaboration with the Asia Art Archive, a project and exhibition with the artist Song Dong called 36 Calendars that had a very big public participation element. You can see members of the public sort of actively participating in this image. In May of this year, we did Mobile N Plus Inflation, which was an exhibition of large-scale inflatable sculptures, including, and you see Cao Fei, who the artist who did the video that was just playing in this room. You see hers in that image, but we also had inflatables by Paul McCarthy, Jeremy Deller, Lucas Town, the Hong Kong artist, Liu Jiahui, the Chinese architect. And that was on the site that was on the West Kowloon site. And despite sort of torrential rains and horrible weather, we got about 150,000 visitors, which we were very happy with. In June, our director, Lars Nippe, who many of you may have heard of here in the UK, he was the first director of the Tate Modern in London, and went to the Moderna Museum in Stockholm, and now is leading us at M+. He, through M+, curated with our colleague, with Ma, the Hong Kong participation in the Venice Biennale with the artist Lee Kit. And we also do a series of workshops and talks called M+ Matters. These are workshops where we bring people, sort of leading experts and thinkers from around the world to sort of come to Hong Kong and help us work through many of the sort of complicated issues that we're trying to work through. Last December, we did our first design workshop called Asian Design. This is collecting curating. We purposely called it Asian Design in a problematic way, knowing that our conclusion would be how you define Asia is highly problematic, but by at least starting to lay out different paths and narratives, we could at least create starting points for how we develop our thinking on what design in and from our part of the world means. There was also one a month later, in January this year, on ink art, and sort of how you define ink art in a contemporary context. And then one in March on China's museum boom, which we did with Columbia University's China Megacities Lab. Coming up later this month, we have another workshop on artwork document, which will be basically investigating sort of where the work lies at a time when different sort of creative practices are less and less about sort of singular objects and more about documentation, about processes, about more temporal things. When there is no thing, what is the thing that we collect? Essentially. In January, we'll have our first architecture exhibition, which will be a preview of our first year of architecture collecting, as well as a more in-depth look at our building. And then followed by the Neon Science Project. I'll try and make this brief, but it's an online, offline, multi-platform project looking at neon signs, especially in Hong Kong, from a visual culture perspective. Essentially, an online exhibition with a crowdsourcing element, asking the public to help us identify existing neon signs, which are fast disappearing from the Hong Kong landscape because they will be becoming neon signs. We'll be looking at neon from multiple angles as part of our visual culture mandate. Neon as neon in readings of urbanism, neon in visual art as a cinematic device, as typography, and so on and so forth. And then also in March, we'll be bringing the Leaf exhibition or version of it back to Hong Kong for the public to see. So I hope all of you have a chance to come visit Hong Kong and come see us there. You don't have to, I guess my point is you don't have to wait till 2017 to do it. And thank you.